Shabbat Shalom. This is Shabbat Shukat. We're reading from the book of Bamidbar, or Numbers. And Moshe took the rod from before Adonai as he commanded him. And Moshe and Aharon gathered the congregation together before the rock, and he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" And Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he struck the rock twice, and the water came out abundantly. Many students of the scriptures secretly find it disturbing that Moshe, such a humble and truly righteous man, should be, in effect, stood down from his position as leader of Israel and subsequently not allowed to enter the land of promise. At the very least, I think most of us are puzzled by the seeming severity of God's action. And so, knowing that Hashem is righteous, just, merciful, and compassionate, we are considering today why God acted as he did. And here are some questions that you might want to consider. The first question: what is Moshe's sin? Is it simply that he struck the rock instead of speaking to it, taking an action that was at odds with God's direct command? If there is a deeper significance, what is that? Let's put this question into perspective. What did Hashem want to accomplish in having the rock provide water when spoken to? And how did Moshe's action fail to accomplish this goal? If God's ultimate purpose was served, did it matter whether the rock provided water when spoken to or when struck? Because wasn't it a miracle in either case? God divided the sea for this nation. He caused their daily bread to rain down from the sky. He made the earth swallow a large group of rebels, as we read in Parsha Korach. So, will Israel truly be impressed by water coming from a rock? Our second question: why did Moshe hit the rock twice instead of just once? Why didn't God cause the water to come out after just one blow? And why did he allow the water to come from the rock at all if it was his desire that the rock be spoken to? And our third question: why did Moshe and Aaron do what they did? Why did they disobey God? Because that, of course, is what they did. They are not average people. They're not the complainers. They're not yesterday's slaves. We're talking about Moshe and Aharon. Moshe, whom God called my servant Moshe, the most trusted in my entire house, the one God spoke to like a man speaks to his friend. Is this man capable of rebellion? And finally, after having disobeyed God, why did Hashem decide to punish them in this way? If you have your scriptures in front of you, you might look at the text to see how the punishment is worded. do you think this punishment is appropriate to the sin? At the end of this short section, we hear that Hashem is sanctified, Vayik Kadesh. But how or by what is he sanctified? And what does that have to do with what happened? Here are some other references that I want to read in order to help us answer these questions. In Bamidbar, chapter 20, verses 22 through 29, we read, they marched on from Kadesh, and they came, the Bnei Israel, the entire community, to Hor Hahar. Hashem said to Moshe and to Aharon at Hor Hahar, by the border of the land of Edom, saying, let Aaron be gathered to his people, for he is not to enter the land that I am giving to the Bnei Israel, since you rebelled against my orders at the waters of Meribah. Take Aharon and Eleazar his son, and bring them up to Hor Hahar. Strip Aharon of his garments, and clothe in them Eleazar his son. Aharon will be gathered up and will die there. So Moshe did as Hashem commanded him. When Moshe and Eleazar came down from the hill, the entire community saw that Aharon had expired, and they wept for Aharon 30 days, the whole house of Israel. 30 days, the traditional mourning period. Bamidbar 27, verses 12 through 19. God said to Moshe, go up this mountain and see the land that I am giving to Bnei Israel. When you've seen it, you will be gathered to your people as Aharon your brother was gathered, since you rebelled against my order in the wilderness of Sin, when the community quarreled, to sanctify me through water before their eyes. They are the waters of quarreling at Kadesh in the wilderness of Sin. Hashem said to Moshe, take yourself Yehoshua son of Nun, a man in whom is my spirit, and put your hand on him. You are to stand him before Eleazar the Cohen and before the entire community, and you are to commission him before their eyes. And in Devarim 3, verses 24 through 29, we hear from Moshe. I pleaded with Hashem at that time, saying, my Lord Hashem, you have begun to let your servant see your greatness and your strong hand. Who is so powerful in heaven and on earth that he can do the like of your deeds and your power? Pray, let me cross over, that I may see the good land that is across the Jordan, this good hill country and the Lebanon. But Hashem was angry with me on your account, and he would not listen to me. Hashem said to me, do not speak to me any more again about this matter. Go up to the top of the range and lift up your eyes toward the sea, toward the north, toward the south, and toward sunrise. See it with your eyes, for you will not cross the Jordan. But command Yehoshua, make him strong, make him courageous, for he will cross over before this people, and he will cause them to inherit the land that you see. And Devarim 32, verses 48 through 52. Hashem spoke to Moshe on that same day, saying, go up to these heights, Mount Nebo, that is in the land of Moab, facing Jericho, and see the land of Canaan that I'm giving to Bnei Israel for a holding. You are to die on the mountain that you are going up, and are to be gathered to your people, as Aharon your brother died and was gathered to his people, because you ma'altem, in the wilderness, in the midst of Bnei Israel, at the waters of the quarrel at Kadesh, in the wilderness of Sin, because you did not sanctify me among Bnei Israel. Indeed, at a distance you will see the land, but there you shall not enter the land that I am giving to Bnei Israel. Ma'altem comes from the root ma'al, to take something which is dedicated to a holy purpose and use it for personal benefit. And finally, Devarim 34, 1-6. Moshe went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, at the top of the range that faces Jericho, and Hashem let him see the land. Gilead as far as Dan, and all Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Yehudah, as far as the hindmost sea and the Negev, and the round plain, the cleft of Jericho, the town of palms, as far as Zoar. And Hashem said to him, This is the land that I swore to Abraham, to Yitzchak, to Yaakov, saying, To your seed I give it. I have let you see it with your eyes, but there you shall not cross. So there died Moshe, servant of Hashem. What is the crime and what is the punishment? What sin did Moshe and Aharon commit, and what is the nature of their punishment? The crime is that the people saw something they should not have seen. And the punishment, of course, is that Moshe and Aharon lost the right to enter the land of promise, as well as their positions as leaders of our people. At that moment, they ceased to be the leaders of our people. What does Torah tell us about the sin? Here are some possible answers from some of our sages, but what do you think? Abravanel said this was the last straw. Aharon lost the right to enter Eretz Yisrael because he made the golden calf. Moshe is punished for encouraging the scouts or not standing up to them when they returned with a bad report. Remember back to that parashah, and the fact is that he didn't really say anything. Both of these episodes contributed to the generation's loss of their privileges to enter the land. The crime at Kadesh was only the minor crime of hitting the rock as opposed to speaking to it, but it was just enough to tip the scales, Abravanel says, against Moshe and Aharon. And he suggests this interpretation because hitting the rock seems to him too minor a crime for the punishment. His solution, the punishment, includes a culmination of wrongs. The weakness of this argument is that the Torah repeatedly focuses on this episode as the reason Moshe and Aharon lost their right to enter the land. Rashi said, speaking to the rock would have inspired people. If the rock is obedient when Hashem or his servant speaks to it, surely we should at least be as obedient as the rock. As a midrashic perspective, this suggestion may be inspiring. However, it's difficult to believe that our people, often described as stiff-necked, having seen God's actions so often, would suddenly take notice of this subtle inspiration. If this was the crime, why did God later describe it as mi'ilah, implying that Moshe and Aharon usurped God's prerogative? The Rambam says that the crime was Moshe and Aharon's inappropriate anger. This does not account for the phrases we find in the various descriptions of the sin. You did not believe in me, you rebelled against my word, etc. This suggestion fits nicely with Rambam's view of anger, unlike other emotions, in which he advocates moderation. When it comes to anger and arrogance, he insists that we must allow no room at all for this emotion. It's understandable in this light that anger in Moshe and Aharon would be viewed by him as a fundamental failing and a sin. Other rabbinic authorities say that Moshe and Aharon seem to ascribe to themselves rather than to God the act of providing water. The text says, "You rebels, from this boulder shall we bring water for you?" Let's look first at our people's complaint. Is it any different from any of the other complaints that we've seen before? We blamed Moshe and Aharon for our misery and for the entire process, which has ripped us away from beloved Egypt and dropped us into this barren and waterless desert. Yes, memory is a strange thing, isn't it? This is by now, however, pretty old news, but one element seems new. The people refer to themselves as God's people. In other words, it's not just a group of innocent people Moshe and Aharon have harmed. It is God himself who's been injured by their actions. This is a new level of chutzpah, accusing Hashem's chief messenger of leading his people astray. Moshe and Aharon have no response, and this too is not new. They again turn to Hashem, who delivers a series of instructions. God desires to provide water in a public, miraculous way, so he commands, "Speak to this rock and extract water from it for the people and their animals." But after all this time and all those rebellions, Moshe has finally had enough. He's fed up. And he bitterly responds to the people, "You rebels! Will we now take water from this rock for you?" Now look at the poem in Bamidbar 21, verse 17 and 18. Then Israel sang this song, "Spring up, O well, sing in chorus to it. The well that was dug out by princes, that was excavated by nobles of the people, with scepter, with their staves." So, to whom do the people give credit for this well that has sprung up in the joyous song that they sing? Moshe and Aharon are the nobles. They are the princes who dug out the well with their staff. So Israel gave Moshe and Aharon credit for the great miracle when the glory should have gone to God. Here are the words of Moshe. Will we now take water for you from this rock? What is he really saying? You ungrateful people, don't you realize Hashem is among you, providing all your needs? Look here. Can Aharon and I get water from a rock? Certainly not. So if water does indeed come from this rock, you know that it is from Hashem. Hashem has done it. Or is what they said more like this? You ungrateful people, don't you see what Aharon and I have done for you? How can you accuse us of bringing Hashem's people into the wilderness to die? You ungrateful rebels. We are about to facilitate yet another miracle for you, even as you reject us. That sounds a little bit more like what actually happened. Bamidbar begins with Israel's refusal to bend themselves to the commandments and the directives of God. In Baha'olateka, we complain about lack of water and then meat. Moshe turns to Hashem in anger at the burden that has been placed upon him. And God addresses the problem, instructing Moshe to let the people know that meat will soon be delivered. Moshe refuses to believe it, and God scolds him gently. Is God's arm too short? This is the first sign that Moshe's faith in his function as conduit between God and his people might be faltering. He is human after all. The next crucial event is Miriam's harsh criticism of Moshe, which must have been extremely painful for him. God responds furiously with a breathtaking account of Moshe's special place in his house. In Shalach Lakah, the failure of the scouts shows that Moshe has weakened. His hope, of course, was that they would return with not only beautiful fruits, but an impressive, positive report of the land. When they returned with an evil report, Moshe is silent, abandoning the stage to Yehoshua and Caleb. Moshe seems unable to bring his nation before God. Has he lost faith in their ability to continue as they continue to attempt to replace him? Let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt. Appoint a leader? Moshe interprets Korach's attack as directed against Aharon, but he discovers to his shock and anger and frustration that his people are rejecting him as well. When God acts, the people accuse Moshe of murder. God is angry because they have learned nothing. But perhaps our people are less and less clear how much of what has happened was the work of God and how much of Moshe. Are they putting upon Moshe the mantle that belongs only to God? Then comes Chukat, the word used for a divine ordinance without explanation. Moshe is angry with us because we have rejected his selfless leadership. And we've accused him of self-aggrandizement. We complain. We complain again, and this time it's too much. We complain against Moshe and Aharon, specifically acknowledging God by referring to ourselves as his people. All of a sudden, we're his people. Moshe and Aharon are the villains, not Hashem. It's just too much. Then God instructs Moshe and Aharon to provide the people with water from a rock. One more miracle. Moshe can again demonstrate his dedication to our welfare, repudiating the claim that he imposed his leadership on us for his own glory, and that he has led us to the desert to die. But he is already impatient with us and angry at our accusations. And who wouldn't be? Perhaps for him, the personal issue has begun to overshadow everything else. Extracting water from the rock is not just another effort to strengthen our faith in God. It is an opportunity for Moshe to bitterly blast us for our attacks on him, demonstrating his continued readiness to care for our needs in spite of our behavior towards him. Ungrateful rebels, I provide you with everything, even as you reject me. See, I offer you water from this rock. It's not that Moshe actually believes that he and not God has made water come from the rock. Accused of having done us wrong, Moshe says, I remain devoted to you, even as you reject me. Moshe and Aharon have no response. Perhaps Moshe meant only to show that he'd always acted for us. He doesn't mean to get credit for the miracle, but that's clearly what happens. This is what the people sang as they celebrated the digging of this miraculous well. And the result, well, what should have been an opportunity to nurture our trust and confidence in God became rather an occasion to acclaim Moshe and Aharon instead. Moshe's function from the beginning has been as God's conduit. He led us out of Egypt as Hashem's messenger. He received Torah from God and proclaimed it to our people. He brought Hashem's words and directives, having received them from God, to us. But attacked and rejected repeatedly, he became more and more defensive, more human. Finally, he made personal use of what should have been yet another opportunity to serve as God's identityless conduit. And so we're impressed with Moshe instead of with God. God's accusation, you caused my people to believe in you instead of causing me to be glorified in their eyes. Therefore, you, Moshe and Aharon, are removed as leaders. the punishment is not formulated as a personal one, that Moshe and Aharon, the men, will never enter the land. It is that they will not bring the nation they have led to the land. They are no longer the leaders, because rather than taking this opportunity to sanctify God, they use it to exalt themselves in our eyes. This portion in Torah is always connected with Eleazar and Yehoshua in the Haftorah. Moshe and Aharon's punishment is not simply being kept from entering the land. They are condemned to join the failed generation as its failed leaders, rather than enter the land as leaders of the successful new generation. Although Moshe and Aharon failed to sanctify God by their actions, God was nonetheless sanctified through this event. God sanctified himself through the judgment of Moshe and Aharon. We were to have seen God's great miracle of the water, but instead we saw Moshe and Aharon and what they did. And then we witnessed Aharon's ascension of the mountain, and we saw that he did not return. We saw that God denied him the opportunity to lead. He would not lead us to Eretz Yisrael, and we knew why. He'd been replaced by his son. Moshe was told that he could see the land, but never enter it. He sinned by distracting our sight from God, so his own vision of the land would be only from afar. By punishing Moshe and Aharon in a public way for usurping his place, God clearly demonstrated his authority. Tem Bi means appropriating something dedicated for a higher purpose to one's own personal gain or glory. In our Ketuvim B'Meshikim reading, we have another example of misuse of that which is dedicated to God. A husband and wife had the right to do anything they chose with the money from the sale of their property, and they could have given a tithe of it. Instead, they committed the entire amount to God and then held back part and lied to God's representative about doing so. God's immediate punishment was death. The moment any of us take something that is meant to bring glory and honor to God, a gift he has given, finances that should have been his, a tenth of our time and energies which should be devoted to his service, use them for our own purposes, we bring down God's anger. God may not demonstrate his anger as strikingly as he did with Hananiah and Sapphira, but he will make his anger known. Perhaps God's chastening will be experienced as with Moshe and Aharon, who were disallowed something very precious to them, failing at the last hurdle before entering the land of promise. What a sad end for both of these men of God. It is for us to learn from such examples so that we do not repeat the errors of those who've gone before us. It is for those who continue to run the race until they arrive at the finish line. It doesn't matter whether you're first or last, as long as you get there. It is for those who arrive at the finish line that rewards are stored up in the Olam Haba, the world to come. I hope that you have a clearer picture of what actually happened now, and also that you can take to heart the words that have been spoken. May God bless you and keep you and make his face shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you and give you his shalom. Blessings.